I've come here to Birches Bay to find out about a unique Australian bush food that's not only found a market, but's taking the world by storm. Chris Reed is the man behind Diemen Pepper, and he's spent a lifetime getting to know this amazingly unique plant, finding out how to harvest the best out of it, and then finding markets for it. This is a story of ingenuity, of academia, of persistence, and a bit of luck along the way. Chris, how you going, mate?
Good, thank you, Tim. Good.
Mate, thank you so much for having us out here. Now, you've been studying these marvellous little plants, these native peppers, here in Tasmania for a best of about 30 years.
I have.
You started out at University of Tasmania. What were you having a look at, mate?
Back then we were looking at the leaf because it's tasty. Well, it's actually hot and spicy, and we thought there might have been some interesting compounds in there which would have meant we could use it as a flavour extract resource.
So you were looking at commercial food flavouring extracts,
Yes.
not at the natural plant product itself.
Not really.
As a whole.
No, we weren't even interested in the berries at all at that stage. It was just, we were really focused on the leaf and the extract that we could get from it. So yeah, yep.
So somewhere along the lines, you flipped. You went from being a researcher in a university, you've actually got a doctorate in pepper,
Yes.
which is pretty cool.
Aren't too many of them about, I
No,
suppose.
no, there aren't. So you've actually flipped now. You've gone from being interested in the phenols and the extracts in the leaf
Yep.
to the natural product, and that's taken quite a few obstacles to overcome to actually bring this bush food to market, hasn't it?
It has. Initially there were only 1 or 2 kilos or a few kilos sold around Australia every year to just a couple of restaurants, so it was a very minor
niche market.
within the native food realm, I guess. And then, but also having looked at the leaf, I became aware of that and thought there might be an opportunity there, so I thought we might jump on that.
One of the obstacles that you've had to overcome is the natural variation in the yield of these plants, isn't it? You've been now growing these in the nursery that you run for many years. How many cultivars have you come across that have shown potential?
Well, I had this wild scheme, sort of frustrated scientist, I suppose, to set up an orchard which would feature up to about 30 individual selections that I gathered from the wild, all of which were female, but within that cohort there were all sorts of characteristics. Some of them fruited every year, some of them didn't fruit very well, some of them were very hard to pick, some of them were a bit disease susceptible, as you'd expect in a normal mixed population. So I did set up an orchard, but unfortunately where we are here at Birches Bay, they're not that happy growing outside, and although we irrigate regularly and try to provide shade and the other things that they need as a naturally an understory plant, they normally grow under the rainforest canopy, so they.
So we're replicating that here with some shade cloth in your plastic house?
Yes, as good as we can get, but it's still not, they're not completely relaxed, I think.
Yes.
So, there are other challenges, and in particular trying to find ones which are going to be a little bit more hardy.
But you've found a couple of cultivars now that you've commercially propagated, and you've got some properties at a couple of secret locations in northern Tasmania.
Yes.
where you're actually undertaking a commercial harvest.
Yeah, we are. Well, we're doing, the way this is operating at the moment is we've got a mixture of people harvesting from effectively orchards, on private land. We also gather from plants that have just sprung up on old fields, farming land that's been abandoned, mining areas, and
Perfect mining rehabilitation plant.
Exactly. Forestry has been a big friend to us. I know it's not to everyone, but there's we gather a lot of leaf and berry from around the periphery of plantation forestry. We go in the 2 or 3 years prior to harvest, the tree harvest, and gather our leaf and berries and so on from the plants that are growing around there. So they're unselected wild plants. There's no special clones going on there. They're all just whatever pops up.
With your selected clones, what sort of yield are you getting every year?
Well, there's 2 issues there. One is the time to first decent harvest, which is quite long. These are a slow-growing rainforest plant, typical of cool climates, so they would take 4 to 5 years to produce a canopy that's big enough to generate fruit that's really worth going back to pick. So there's that issue, and then within the collection of plants that I've gathered over time, I've got 2 or 3 which will produce a couple of kilos per plant within 4 or 5 years. So, and then upwards from there. So as the canopy grows, so does the yield. But having said that, they don't yield every year. There are a whole lot of factors which we don't know anything about yet. So this is a long process, Tim. I mean, this is going to be generational kind of thing. It's not something I'm going to solve. But there's unknowns: insect pests, fungal problems. Different things that are going to emerge. Climate change is going to play into it, I think. So, there's a lot going on there, and so somebody will come up with the perfect plant down the track, and then somebody will improve on it. That's just how it works. If you think about apples, that's we're at the
You're at the cutting edge.
Yeah, and the apple industry's at 1,000 years down the track. So
And that's the thing. It's going to take a long time to get the cultivars exactly right, to line breed your plants and get exactly the characteristics that you want.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you go for more yield, you get more disease.
Of course.
And all of those sorts of things that go along with it.
There'll be issues. Sorry, I tapped. There'll be issues that we can't even imagine at this stage. Canopy management is going to be something that'll be interesting. Some plants tend to grow in a different form than others. Some have some of the berries are very hard to prise off the plants. Others are very easy. And there's a fruiting habit in which some plants will cluster the berries on the end of the stems. Others will grow them in all the leaf axils down the stem. They are very difficult to pick. So there are all sorts of things which we can't even imagine at this stage are going to be needed to be selected for. Yeah.
Now, the next problem that you had to overcome was you've grown the product, you've picked the product, then you had to go down the street and you had to buy a dryer, a separator, a processing, and a sorter.
Yeah.
So who were you able to buy all that from?
Oh, there wasn't one. I looked online and I couldn't find a thing. No, it's been a very entertaining process, I would say, Tim. We've started with very crude, typical farmer solutions, back at the beginning, back in the 90s, where I was adapting old farm machinery and so on, and we built things that looked roughly like hop kilns. And progressively over the time since then, I've just, finessed all that. So now we dry using only hot air generated by solar power, electrical heaters. We've got cleaning equipment which is adapted probably from the seed cleaning industry.
Okay. Seed sorting and cleaning.
Seed sorting and the spice trade. So I bought equipment that's then had to be tweaked and modified to suit my purposes.
Now, we can't show all of the equipment involved in this process, but just talk us through what you actually do. You start out and you dry the berries and you dry the leaves.
Yep. So we bring the fresh product comes in from the field, wherever we've harvested it from. If it's berries, we load it into the dryer, which is basically a big kiln. We pile it up probably about 150 to 200 mil thick. And then we drive a lot of hot air through it with a powerful fan. So that takes about 2 or 3 days to dry, a couple of tonne at a time. And then we would be looking to take it off there. And of course, at that stage, it still includes lots of leaves and buds and little bits of stick and all sorts of things like that we need to get rid of. So then we run it through our cleaning equipment. Having got it, the issue at the beginning is to get it dry enough, quickly enough, so that we don't get mould development and things like that. So that was a big learning curve back in the day. We've found that a lot of people were just drying it on their windowsills and things like this, very slowly. Mould develops very quickly. So we've moved away from that much more rapid, intensive drying process to try and keep it clean and healthy. And then removing all those impurities that I mentioned. I've got this, as I said, modified equipment that does the trick. And then the last part is a bit of careful hand sorting. The leaf impurities and bits of stick are very much minor within the leaves. So they've all been hand harvested. You'll be able to see how that works. And inevitably there are lots of leaves and things that get included in the product. So I don't fuss about that from the pickers. I've mechanised that process. So we clean our berries after they've been dried, so it's much easier to manage the various techniques for drying, for sorting and cleaning. So, and then the final part is, yes, I said, it's a careful hand inspection of everything we sell. So
now you were selling domestically to begin with, small amounts into the local market, and then all of a sudden you started to get more and more peppers and more leaves. And the next problem is, now that you've invested all this money finding a market, you were quite lucky with finding a market.
I was, yeah. I had, you know, I mean, people will always say these things in retrospect, but I think I had a couple of good lucky breaks.
Yep.
So, you know, I've begun to sell into the European market, particularly into Germany and Switzerland and France, and those things came about through personal connections, and, you know, me being a very persistent emailer and correspondent, and, you know, really following up on those personal connections. So I know the CEOs of the companies that I deal with, and they're all pretty large spice importers in the European environment, and they would be bringing in, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of spices into the European market every year.
The international pepper market might surprise some people. It's worth a fair bit of money, isn't it?
It's worth a lot of money. I can't tell you a number at the moment, but it has been more than 1 million tonnes a year, I think. It's produced predominantly in Vietnam and India, but there are also, besides that, pepper nigrum, which is the pepper we all know sits on the table and we grind it in our grinders. There are a whole bunch of other species, not necessarily related. This one's not related at all to that vine, which fall into the category of peppers. So and they don't all look the same. And so the companies that are bringing in, you know, importing into, say, in France, my pepper, are looking for the novelty factor that this pepper offers. To add
what is the point of difference beyond the fact that it's grown in Tasmania?
Well, that's important, but the other important thing is that it's not related to the other peppers, so it has a completely different suite of flavour compounds within the berry. And not only that, the berry is a berry, so it's got fruit, sugars and sweet berry flavours that remain with it as you dry it, so that the initial impact or the sense that people get when they bite into it or taste it, and this is always emphasised by my French customers, is that they get that sweet berry impression before they get the heat that comes later. And the heat is a different kind of, has a different characteristic to, you know, pepper or horseradish or wasabi or any of the others. It's unique to this species. This is a member of a very small family of plants that originated in Gondwana land and spread themselves around the Pacific.
So Chris, a lot of people talk about bush foods, but it's not as simple as finding a product that you believe in that has a nice flavour, is it? There's a lot of science and research goes behind it, from finding the right cultivar through to improvising your equipment and then being lucky enough to find a market.
Absolutely, and you know, and it's a constantly changing situation too, because people are always asking different questions, and particularly within the marketing of spices and food products more generally, there's a terrific increase in the degree of supply chain management that we have to accommodate nowadays. So, you know, there's a lot of documentation required. We need to be able to demonstrate every step of the way between the point of harvest right through to the point of delivery. So there's all of that sort of stock and product management, largely to do with, you know, supplying a healthy product, obviously, but also to do with sustainability, to do with you know, having ethical relationships with your harvesters and your supply people and all of that. So there's a lot of other, you know, there's a lot of other things that begin to become important in the whole marketing realm, really.
So Chris, knowing what you know now, and with the onslaught of paperwork, particularly the ESG compliance, would you do it again if you had the chance?
Well, I'm a bit old to do it again, but I would, of course I would, because it's been an absolute gift. I mean, I can't, daily I have to pinch myself to think, how did this thing fall in my department or my place in my lap? Because it's been such an interesting process. You know, starting with a completely novel product, nobody knows anything about it really, and just being able to follow it all the way through. It's given us this wonderful, it's been a financial gift for the farm, so we've been able to do a lot of other things as a consequence of having the pepper in the mix. But apart from that, it's just been a fascinating thing, especially for a frustrated scientist.
Now, Chris, it's not just about pepper with you, is it? It's a whole range of things here on 5 Bob Farm down in Birches Bay in Tassie.
Yep.
You're giving lots of opportunity to young people in the area and also the community at large.
Yep. Reflecting on the whole thing, having been a gift, I feel like it's not difficult for me to kind of make it flow out there in the community. So we have an art trail here on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
We support
and you have an artist prize every year and exhibitions.
We prize. That's a not-for-profit that's hosted on the farm, so it's not part of the farm business, but we sponsor it to the extent that we provide a curator and we supply the spaces and a little studio and so on. And that entity has got an artist in residence program going, so there's been people in situ there for the last almost 12 months now, doing various sorts of things from writing to sculpture to painting. There's a lot of feedback, there's a lot of interaction between the guys that work here on the farm and the people that come through the farm. It's unusual, I think, to have a farm in which lots of people are invited to move through it. But my heart was a bit in my mouth when we started thinking about it. But it is actually, it's been a huge, it's had a huge impact on the way that everybody who works on the farm thinks about what they're doing, and I think that's been quite a useful and important thing.
And it's given some young farmers a start as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, separately from that, we've got a couple of younger people who have got good ideas and no money, and no land, in particularly no land. So we've just made available some of our infrastructure, land, tractors and equipment and so on, which requires a fair bit of capital, which I've accumulated over years. We've got a lot of irrigation infrastructure here that is probably underutilised these days. So there's an opportunity there for somebody who's got a good idea to come in, pay a reasonable rent and use the equipment and pursue their own special projects. So we've got, for example, Stephen, as I mentioned earlier, who's got his he buys a couple of 100,000 iris bulbs a year and grows them out and sells them into the mainland market. So and then there's another woman who has her own market garden on another part of the farm, and that's something that I want to pursue into the future. I'm getting pretty old, as you can tell, so I need to think about, we all are. What are we going to do with this property, that I've put together, over the last 30 years, and I don't want to see it just turned into a bit of separate titles of real estate and houses built all over it, because I'm still committed to the concept that agriculture can support employees, it can support the community, and it can be an active participant in the community. So that's my kind of shtick really at this stage.
So you were given the gift of finding a native plant that fulfilled a whole new segment in the spice market.
Yep.
You then invested 30 years of hard work and a lot of risk into making your dream come true. You had a bit of luck getting into the European market and a little bit of connection.
Yep.
And that's led to you now giving back to the community with your sculpture trail, with share farming, and with all sorts of other community garden events.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to, crow too much about any of that, because it's just to me, it's a natural development that's happened with the group of people that I have around me on the farm. There's, the people that are involved with the art trail. I have another group of community people who are working on a sort of mental health project within the garden, and then there are the volunteers that come in and work in the garden and in the art trail, and all that sort of stuff. We've got a vineyard as well. We put a vineyard in over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I know, you silly bugger.
Yeah, madness, complete madness. Anyway.
But that's going well. I tasted the wine about a month ago and it was fantastic.
Good on you. Yeah, well, there we go.
Absolutely fantastic.
So we're pleased with that. We're collaborating there with a vineyard down the road.
Well, Chris, thank you very much, mate. You're an absolute inspiration for those of us who have a bit of land and a few dreams and think that perhaps they could have a play one day, because sometimes with a lot of hard work and intelligence, it actually works out.
Yeah, it does.
Guys, if you want to find out more about what's going on here, hit the link in the description. Come down to 5 Bob Farm if you're in Tasmania. Call in and see if Chris is around. You'll be absolutely inspired, and go on the art trail. It's so totally worth it. Send this video to someone who puts pepper on their food.